Hi everyone, it's Ajanette, and I'm going to wrap up Chapter 1 talking about some final points with regard to research design. So when we're talking about research, it's really important to make sure that our research is both valid and reliable. So we use different tools in research, and we want to make sure that the tool that we're using is valid. In other words, it truly is measuring or assessing the intended target. So if I'm trying to measure IQ, I want to have a valid IQ test, or I want to have a valid measure of intelligence, if that's my larger overall construct. I can't be asking questions about like personal preferences or habits or things of that nature. I have to really be targeting my questions specific to intelligence. Additionally, measures should be reliable in that if you take a particular intelligence test, let's say in January, it's quite unlikely that somehow you became miraculously more intelligent from January to June. So if I take the same test again in June, it should be a fairly consistent measure. In other words, your IQ test from January should be fairly similar, give or take a margin of error, as to what the results are in June. And that means reliability or consistency of the measurement. Additionally, if we have multiple measures of intelligence, overall, they should be putting you in about the same range of intelligence. So we always want to make sure we're utilizing both reliable and valid measures in order to make sure that our conclusions themselves are valid and reliable. Two specific research designs that are very specific and pertinent to human development are longitudinal and cross-sectional designs. Both of these designs allow us to look at how a quality or trait changes over time, and time becomes a factor in human development because that's exactly what we're trying to understand, is how we change and grow over time within the different developmental realms or domains, as we call them, across the various developmental periods. So we may want to compare intelligence from middle childhood to adulthood, or to adolescence to adulthood. We may want to compare memory functioning from childhood to adolescence to adulthood in different stages of of adulthood, specifically for late adulthood. We may want to change how your sense of self changes over time, and that requires us to integrate time as an element of our research study. There's two ways that we can do that. We can use a longitudinal design. A longitudinal design takes one group of people and it follows them over time. So what happens is I'm looking at how this group changes over time. If I'm targeting memory, I'm going to do repeated measures of memory on these same individuals over time. And then what happens is I can see how their memory is performing in adolescence, and then I'm going to measure them again in early adulthood, and then I'm going to measure them again in middle adulthood, and I'm going to measure them again in late adulthood. And I'm going to be able to clearly see how their memory is changing over time. Because I'm using the same group of individuals, I know there aren't individual variations or factors that might be contributing to the difference I'm seeing from one age group to the next, which means that I can say conclusively that the changes that I'm seeing are due specifically to time. But the problem with this is that our longitudinal studies are time-consuming. They can be very expensive. You have what we call attrition, or participants dying off or falling out of the study, particularly if it's a longer period of time. So large institutions or governmental backed research, like research backed by the NIH, those are the studies that are usually longitudinal in nature. Cross-sectional designs are an alternate to longitudinal studies, and these tend to be more time efficient and cost efficient because rather than taking one group and following them over time, I'm going to pull multiple people from all the groups all at once. So I'm going to pull, instead of like maybe taking 500 people and following them and measuring their memory in adolescence, and then again in early adulthood, and then again in middle adulthood. Now I'm going to take 100 people from adolescence, 100 people from early adulthood, 100 people from middle adulthood, 100 people from early late adulthood, and 100 people from late adulthood. And what that's going to do for me is that's going to allow me to compare those age groups the way that I want to, all at once in a very quick, time efficient and cost efficient way. But one of the challenges is now that I don't know if the difference, because there's individual variations within each age group, I don't know if the difference is truly due just to natural normative development across the lifespan, or is it due to a cohort effect? Your cohort is the group of people you're born into, a group of people that you travel through time with. So you want to, you know, cohorts are affected by different things. Like if anybody knows anybody from the Depression era, if you have a grandparent or a great-grandparent from the Depression era, they're very prudent with their money. They're very cautious. They often tend to be very skeptical of financial institutions, rightfully so, given their life experience. But that cohort is uniquely different based upon that experience than other age groups. So the studies that I do about maybe financial acumen or financial literacy would be very different in that cohort, and that's a distinct cohort effect, not just a normal normative development effect, if that makes sense. So that being said, cross-sectional studies, although they offset some of the negatives of a longitudinal study, they bring their own weaknesses as well. So it's always about kind of weighing the pros and cons, looking at the researcher's intent and resources available, and that will help to kind of guide the type of design that you're going to utilize. So another differentiation we need to make is differentiating between correlational research and experimental research. Correlational is looking at the co-relationship between two or more variables or factors, and we want to look at, do they co-occur together in a particular pattern. The two types of patterns that we see emerging are positive, negative, or there could be no relationship at all. So that would be a third pattern. In a positive relationship, as one variable increases, the other increases, or as one variable decreases, the other variable decreases. So the pattern is they're going in the same direction. Negative relationships are different. Negative relationships, they're going in opposite directions. As one increases, the other decreases. As one decreases, the other increases. So what we know is attendance and exam scores have a positive relationship. The stronger the attendance, the stronger the exam scores. The poorer the attendance, as attendance declines, exam scores decline. We also know that there's a negative relationship between, let's say, exercise and risk of Alzheimer's. The more you exercise, the lower your risk of Alzheimer's. The less you exercise, the greater your risk of Alzheimer's. And so that shows that the two variables are going in different directions. Correlations are great research designs. We use them to address a lot of social science questions. The challenge is there's only one design that allows us to study cause and effect, and that is in fact an experiment. An experiment is a carefully controlled procedure. It includes some core basic components. There's a lot of control and manipulation on the part of the researcher. In other words, the researcher is carefully controlling the environment. They're also carefully controlling what the participants are exposed to, and they're very much manipulating which group is exposed to what, at what time, to what extent, and based upon that carefully controlled procedure and random assignment, what they can do is they can say, okay, since I controlled everything and kept all other things constant, and through random assignment, I kind of equalize the chance of individual differences affecting my outcome, then I can say that my variable caused a change so my independent variable caused a change in my dependent variable. So there's 4 main components, and I'm using some language that you're going to have to be familiar with. You have a control group, and that's your comparison group. You have an experimental group, and that is your kind of research study group. You have an independent variable. That's kind of, do you want to see if that changes something? So that's your causal variable. Does the independent variable cause something? Your dependent variable is the effect variable. What does it cause? So does a particular drug affect memory, and how so? So what happens is the control group is not exposed to the independent variable, or sometimes it's called the treatment or treatment variable. In my example, the control group would not get the drug. The experimental group would. They are exposed to the independent variable or the treatment or treatment variable. So this group gets the drug, this group doesn't, and then I'm going to do a memory study for both groups, and I'm going to see if my experimental group actually did better on the memory test based upon the memory drug that I gave them. So I hope that makes sense. Here's an example for correlational design between exercise and health. The more you exercise, the greater your health. And then there's some additional examples in the book that could be valuable for you as well. So I want you to just kind of start thinking about for yourself, what types of questions might you have? What research questions might you have? Can they be addressed by research? And then what type of a design would apply? And then you also have the opportunity to do an empirical article review for this class. And that will allow you to pull an empirical study, review the study in depth, and kind of you need to assess at that time, is that particular study reflecting a correlational design? Is it reflecting an experimental design? And then even within those types of designs, is it biological research in nature? Was there a longitudinal component or a cross-sectional component? So just try to use the empirical article analysis as an opportunity to further explore and practice these skills in assessing research appropriately. I think it's a really important skill to have. As an educated individual, you really need to make informed choices throughout life, and rather than relying on somebody's opinion or some presumed authority figure, it would be best if you can go directly to the research yourself, evaluate it in a thorough, qualitative way, and then you're able to now make an informed choice in your life, which can be important in deciding what program you want to attend and understanding their effectiveness ratings. It can be something related to, do you want to take a particular treatment for a health condition? Looking at studies that have been done on the different efficacy of various treatment options. So very important that you're able to now make informed choices. So that's it for our chapter 1. I hope you enjoy and you find it to be informative. And then we'll be launching into chapter 2 and 3. And I will look forward to seeing you in those upcoming chapter and module reviews. Have a good one.